was like, all right, cool. And as I'm sure you know, if somebody tells you that they're not available or can't do something, you immediately ask them if they know somebody that's available or can do anything. And so I was like, who
That's a
would you
good plan.
suggest? And then he suggested you, and you just immediately said yes. And I was like, oh, thank goodness.
That's
A lot of
fantastic. Yeah, this is officially the first time I've ever been a guest on a podcast, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's like a proper podcast. This is not live, it's purely recorded. I'm gonna
Right.
look over everything afterwards and then post it. I mean, like, as for myself, why I've started this is I just kind of, uh, it's one of those things where it's like I should have started this ages ago, but I didn't start it ages ago whenever I should have, you know?
Sure, sure.
uh, Especially with like the YouTube channel. I shared that so you could see what I'm doing, which is like I kind of, as of right now, I'm just trying to become the largest compiler of all fairy tale and folk tales. Is currently how I'm viewing the channel, but I'm kind of hoping to expand it out into actually talking about why stories matter or just art in general, because there are some like
Right.
dancers or singers that I kind of want to talk to in the future too. But I was like, I have to start somewhere, talking to somebody, and get used to the format. And
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
just started looking and sending emails out to everyone that I was watching at the time or who they referenced. So I don't know, aside
Very
from
cool.
Adam, because I found him a couple weeks ago, and then he referenced you. I've also watched Malcolm Guite and
Oh yeah.
um, oh, uh, George Shaw. I think that's his name.
Oh,
He's a recent-ish convert to Orthodoxy,
oh,
and
cool.
then yeah, Jonathan Pageau, and there's this lady called Hilary Lane who seems to be really good at like diagnosing why stories and media nowadays suck and how you can get out of that rut. So I was like, it'd be cool to try
Oh,
and talk to all of them.
Hillary, what was her last name?
Lane, Layne. She also has a
Okay.
Substack that I recently subscribed to, and I have never previously used Substack, but I've heard a lot of people say that they used it. So
Yeah.
I was like, I guess I gotta figure out how it works. But that was me taking up a lot of the front end of this. So who
Yeah.
are you? What do you do?
Well, my name is Aaron McNally. I'm a middle-aged guy in the Midwest in Iowa. Um, I got a master's in English about 10, 15 years ago. But I've been a lover of poetry since like 94, 95, when I got introduced to people like Manley Hopkins and Rilke and Dylan Thomas and T.S. Eliot, by
Mm,
some really good English teachers in high school. I kind of hit the jackpot in high school, um, with some really great English teachers. So I've been living and breathing poetry for a good while. And in the past, I don't know, 6, 7 years, I've been gradually kind of starting a Substack and a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel, Poesophy. My Substack is also called Poesophy, but the address is aaronmcnally.substack.com.
mm.
Where YouTube channel, I basically just read poetry that's inspiring to me, and poetry that's sort of in my philosophical spiritual realm. And then on the Substack, I do a little bit of interpretation of literature, a little bit of theorizing, and a little bit of just like sort of virtue ethics and living well kind of essays as well.
Yeah, so in checking your Substack, let me pull it up real quick. I don't know if this is just your most recent article or if this is something that gets sent out uh, as soon. This is Mel, by the way. He's decided to bother me at
Hey.
the moment. um, it was a writing about dejection, which
Uh,
I asked you for references for poetry that you'd start with,
Oh,
and you said dejection. And so I read it last night, and I was like, this is really dense, and I'm not a poetry guy. So I was really lost for a lot of it. So it was just
sure.
very convenient that in my inbox, whenever I was looking for your Substack, it was an explanation of dejection. And so, as you said, it's Poesophy.
Poesophy.
Poesophy, which you previously told me is a concept you've kind of coined yourself, if I'm understanding correctly.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yeah, you
how?
bring up the dejection ode, which is by my favorite poet, Coleridge. And Coleridge was equally interested in philosophy and poetry. Indeed, he might have actually been a better poet had he not been so interested in philosophy. He seemed to get really caught up in speculation and reading. And so he might have created more poetic content had he not done so. But um, I'm kind of happy with the way it landed because, along with another favorite poet of mine, Wallace Stevens, who's a very philosophically minded poet who was an excellent poet throughout his career. I just I find that space to be the space that speaks most deeply to me, that keeps me the most captivated, that causes lines to become easily memorized and recalled when I'm working or walking or doing chores or anything. And so when I have that kind of material that I'm interacting with, um, kind of contemplative material, that's my sweet spot. I'm a cradle Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
who was sort of away from the church for a long time, but has come back to it in middle age. And that's sort of my métier. It's like prayer, like internalized, memorized prayer that you have that you can constantly go to throughout the day and throughout different situations. That's just the way my mind and body work.
Awesome. So, you said you were a cradle Catholic and came back. Is dejection and your contemplating it something that helped you bridge that gap while you were lost?
Yeah,
I
that
guess if lost is a
it
word.
might have been. Um, Loss is probably apt. Um, yeah, the dejection ode. Part of what Coleridge realizes in that poem is that a good amount of what has led to that feeling of depression, which he describes as a loss of his genial spirits. Uh, he speaks about an anhedonic state, the inability to experience pleasure, the inability to like experience like a connection with the world. He links that to like an over intellectualization of the world and a lack of giving and opening. He says in that poem, "We receive but what we give."
Mm.
And that's this turning point for him. And when he realizes that that something about the selfishness and the isolation that that was what was contributing to his being broken off. I think that that was part of what I realized at a certain point in my life where relationships weren't working. I didn't really have a career. I didn't really have even my poetry, which was like, supposedly like the most important thing or whatever. Even that didn't seem to be like going anywhere. And I was like, well, something has to change. And it beginning to slowly open my heart to God incarnate in Christ. Um, that was part of my process back into a spiritual relationship with the world. And so, yeah, the dejection ode, I'm not going to say it like solved the problem for me, but
Yeah.
it was in my mind like the whole time. Like some of those lines from that poem would continue to come back to me.
Did you go the route of becoming like a strict atheist, or did you always have the sense that there was something other?
Yeah, I definitely always still had the spiritual sense. I always had some kind of idea that there was, you know, I guess what Christopher Hitchens would call the numinous or something, which he gets, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
from Kant. But um, yeah, there was always a spiritual element to me, and I would always kind of argue with atheist friends too a little bit because I still had like the concept of the Catholic idea of God, like being like
Mm-hmm.
outside of the realm of human ability to express or define. And so, if I'd hear like a strictly materialist friend like say, whatever that God doesn't exist because this can't possibly be true. Well, yeah, but that's not God. It would
Yeah.
flummox them. They'd get very annoyed by that. I'm like, I'm not making this up. This is just Catholic school 101. This is just what I learned. So yeah, I was never really a hard atheist, but I was just, I probably thought like Christianity was kind of juvenile, superstitious, or something. I probably had like condescending attitude toward it because I hadn't really experienced its full richness and fullness
Mm-hmm.
as an adult who was able to appreciate that.
Yeah, so I like that idea of like not being able to experience its full richness and still being attracted to the beauty of art. I told a friend recently, and this is a friend who lives in another nation and doesn't speak English, so we're speaking through uh, like AI translations with each other. So
Oh,
it's kind of
interesting.
interesting to hear his way of referencing because he's not a Christian, but he told me he was like whenever I mentioned I was a Christian, he was like, "Oh, I had a near death experience and I saw Jesus, but there's nobody else here that knows about him." And so we've been talking because he that was whenever he was 6 and he's 26 now. So he's spent 20 years not having a frame of reference for who this God is that he saw, but still following him as best as he can, like personally internalize. And we got on the subject recently of music, specifically being the art medium that we were talking about. And I said, I think of art as being the closest, it's like the perfect medium of spiritual and physical meeting, like where God communicates, not purely spiritual, not purely physical, because with the real
You said
world you could,
music,
yeah, music or just art in general, but we were talking about
art
music
in
whenever I
general,
said that.
right? Okay, sure, sure.
Yeah, so that it was just that idea of like art has soul inside of it somewhere. It connects all humanity. It's why you can go all the way back to the earliest manuscripts and poetry that we find, or just stories in general, and you'll be like, I recognize who is in here, and there are parts of me in him.
Right,
So I just like Gilgamesh. It's the oldest thing that we have, but whenever you read Gilgamesh, you're kind of taken aback because you're like, this is, even though Gilgamesh is supposed to be this demigod figure, you're like, all the problems he has are problems that I will likely face or I have faced, but just taken to the next level. It transcends the time, uh, and it still speaks to the concept of like God, but it's a misattribution, is what I always call stories like that. It doesn't, because it's Gilgamesh and it's like Persian gods. It doesn't know the true God, but it's still trying to tell you and communicate God to you.
right. Yeah, I mean, I would have conversations with poet friends who were like, adamant atheists, and it'd be like, I would try to express, but you're writing a poem,
Mm-hmm.
and you're writing the poem under the under the belief that there's some kind of truth or reality outside of your individual experience that can connect to the experiences of others in this abstract way.
Hmm.
But they might not be able to get that, and you know they might not be able to get that, and thus you're workshopping the poem, you're sharing it with people, trying to improve it to get it to the next stage. So you're knowing that there's a truth to the poem outside of even either my or your cognitions. So there's this truth outside of that. And so there has to be some kind of way to frame that, that there is an ability to comprehend something outside of the comprehension of these two individual psyches, right? So there's got to be some kind of like larger consciousness. And, then like later in the conversation, after topics had changed, then, it would come out that they believe in ghosts or something, or
Yeah.
like, so we're like, okay, so you believe in a spiritual realm. It's really what it really boils down to, I think, is it's just like a sort of in the hyper modern materialist era, in the era of the mass produced book, and then television, mass media, there became this type of kind of proselytizing evangelism that was a very, people call it, what's the word people use for it? Fundamentalist kind
Hmm.
of way of talking about God, with a type of judgmental morality that imposed on people, that people felt really icky about, and they rebelled against, and they rejected that, and they just wanted to stay away as far as possible from that as they could, which kind of it makes sense, and I can appreciate that. But that's not the whole Christian story, and that's
Yeah.
not, the best way to think about God or to evangelize. So, it seemed like it was less about them not really believing in God than in them not um, not wanting to subscribe to certain characterizations of God or something like that.
I don't know, for a lot of people that I know. So uh I really love the arts. My primary interest is film. That's just
Oh yeah,
my earliest memories are film, right? And I and my family always watched classic movies, like black and white films. There's a channel called
sure.
TCM.
Love
And
TCM. Yeah,
yeah, TCM, yeah, awesome. And so I watched loads of those films, and it's so odd because like up through, really, I'd say around the 60s, so like the end of the 60s, there was just a complete drop off in
hmm
how stories were told suddenly. And you
mm
still had really good films up to probably around like 2008, I'd say, where you could still have these like incredibly great films that I'd still want to watch, that I'd still be like, you have to watch this film. And
mm
then it dropped off again in how stories were told and how much they resonated with me. And I'm
mm.
always I'm always trying to get people to like go back, and this is with any art medium really, where my friends will like still go see the latest Star Wars movie, and then all of them will talk about how much it sucks. And I'm like, yeah, well, we could like not watch the newest Star Wars movie and instead watch this really old film that's black and white, that really connects. It has characters that are all alive, and
mm.
you'll just recognize the story as your own.
Sure.
And they'll just be like, well, it's older, so it can't be as good. And I'm like, no, 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 no. This is the opposite of what it is. I'm finally, a lot of my friends are now starting to kind of like turn around, but to try and bring this back to what we were just talking about, it's like those drop off points. Looking backwards, you can see that's where it's like this is the first drop off where Christianity and spirituality were considered insufficient to properly communicate the real world, since the real world is only physical.
hmm
And then you had another drop off where you have, the postmodern world, where you have this weird pseudo, everyone says that there's nothing but the real world, but postmodernism says the real world is whatever you choose to believe, immediately putting the real world into an entirely metaphysical reality. And so it's like we used to have a universal language, which is the language that you are aware of now with Christianity and Catholicism, other Christian sects, where it's like God is as physical and as spiritual at the exact same
Mhm.
time. So whenever you had a group of people creating stories, and this is the majority of all of history, is people having this idea of spirituality and physical being as real as each other. And so all of their stories hit deeper because everything they say and reference hits you on every aspect of what humanity and existence is. And so as we pulled away from that to just saying there's no God, there's just reality because we can't put him under a microscope. It's like, well, of course you can't put infinity under a microscope, but
Right.
people who think that their minds can hold the entirety of the universe inside of them wouldn't accept that. And then the people who, which the majority of people can't, they don't have, I'm trying to think of the right word, they can't think of understanding everything inside of a microscope, so they maintained that spiritual connection, but they lost God because of everybody who thought they could understand everything by looking at it through a microscope. So you have this weird pseudo soul, but all of it's trying to be analytical. And it's like, well, the soul isn't analytical. The physical can be analyzed and understood, but the soul is something that is intended to be an abstract and to move you and to kind of like draw you closer to God and connect you to everybody else in a way that the physical can never accomplish.
Sure, sure. And yeah, I think that's what that I like, I like the word spiritual because, it gets at that spiritus, which can be breath or wind.
Mm-hmm.
It's like physical in the sense that it's air, right? It's movement, but it's also spiritual in the sense of intangible. It's this the animus that gives movement to matter. It's the thing. I'm trying to get closer to Aristotle. I haven't really gotten into Greek philosophy the way I'd like to, but I really want to read Aristotle on the soul and all that stuff. I think that would be helpful for my vocabulary. But then again, just from a poet's perspective, I mean, in the Christianity, of course, you have the Trinity, and the Spirit
Mm-hmm.
is one part of the Trinity. And at Mass every Sunday, we say we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son, who with the Father and the Son is adored and glorified, who has spoken through the prophets, And that is right in with poetry, with the inspiration of, the muses and all of that stuff. I kind of I feel like I went on a tangent, but you were talking about this something about materialism sort of causing us to sort of lose our grip on being able to enter the depths of
Yes.
storytelling, and I think I was just trying to get into that space. So yeah, it's interesting story. What I guess I'm curious what's an example of a classic film that you feel tells a really good story.
I'll go with the Christmas classic "It's a Wonderful Life" because I
Oh,
it is
of
my
course.
personal favorite
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
So in particular with "It's a Wonderful Life," Frank Capra, the director,
Hmm.
uh, I have his autobiography on my shelf right here. grab it out because he's my favorite director. So he calls himself the name above the title because he was the first director to have his name above the studio's title.
Uh-huh.
Like his
Yeah.
name in old Hollywood put butts in seats, regardless of who he worked with. He had the
Right.
reputation. But I'm trying to remember what film it was. He won an Academy Award for one of his films, and it may have been It Happened One Night. Um, I can't remember if it was It Happened One Night or if it was one of his later films. And essentially, he won everything. And he's an Italian immigrant, and he was a Catholic. But just being caught up in the studio system, he was like, the only thing I was concerned about was making the best movie. And he won the Academy Award, and he couldn't come up with another film. Nothing he read inspired him because he was a big literature nerd. And his family, he had a pretty large family with his wife. And he just talks about one day being at a summer home and just leaving the house and going to this cave and then being so overwhelmed with this sense of like there's nothing I can do now. My life is over because I've accomplished everything I can accomplish, to the point that he just vomited because he was under so much mental stress. And whenever he came back, he said the next day I woke up and a friend brought somebody who I'd never met before over. He's like, you got to talk to this guy. He said, so me and that guy sat down alone in a room together, and that guy sat me down and he said, "You're the best." I, you know, trying to recall it. He's like, "You're the best at making films, but you're not making something that has purpose." And
Mm.
so for Frank Capra, he was like, "I don't." He's like, "I never saw that dude again, but it's somebody that my friend knew, so he's probably real, but I think he might have been an angel because whenever he said you're not making anything with purpose, he's like, it
Yeah.
suddenly dawned on me that I had, in my pursuit of making the best film, forgotten to include God in the process. And so
Mm.
after he had the sudden realization, he's like, God is going to appear somewhere in all of my films moving forward. His films got further in despair, but at the same time higher in the recovery and in the excitement that you feel once everything is resolved. And the core element is good people all around because he says he
Mm.
believes in the innate goodness of humanity. Um, but I think if he was going to articulate it with what most people call the innate goodness of humanity, he'd probably say it's slightly different than how most people articulate it now. But It's a Wonderful Life he considered his greatest film. And in that film, you've seen it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm assuming,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So you know
Times.
that it starts off George Bailey's always giving up what he wants so that other people can have
Mhm.
what they want, and he finally has the
Yep.
opportunity to get what he wants after he marries Mary,
Mhm.
and then he has to give up literally everything, and so he finally gets to the point where he can have the life he wants, where he's got his models, he's got his family, the bank, the building and loan is doing well, and they lose the money again, and he goes all the way to the
Mhm.
point of wanting to die, but by the end of the film, you go all the way back to the top, and what changes is everyone prays for him, which is the thing at the
Mhm.
very beginning of the film is that everybody prays for him, and then he prays himself, and that's whenever you start the what appears to be another downward spiral, but ends up going into an upward spiral to the end of the thing where he appreciates everything that he has and realizes that by giving away everything, I have accomplished more than I could have with how I imagined myself. And in the film, just because I see it, we receive but what we give.
Mhm.
Um, his father's photo on the wall in the building and loan says, "You can only take with you that which you've given away," which I
Mhm.
think is another way of saying we receive
Chris,
but
yeah.
what we give. Yeah. Um, and I feel like I'm rambling significantly more. I forgot where I was going with
No.
all of that, but let's just, what are your thoughts on
Yeah, it's
that?
interesting because so yeah, when you think about it, like in terms of like plot and story, I mean, it's not very complicated. I mean, I can't remember the circumstances, but for whatever reason, he needed to stay in the town. And then, but
Mhm.
he was able to marry this wonderful woman with whom he was deeply in love. And, it seemed like everything is, like you point out, like every time that he got to a place where he was despairing, it was because his vanity was threat, or like not his vanity necessarily, but his his
Like,
idea of what should or ought to be was threatened, rather than his just rudimentary appreciation of the basic wealth of experience and human relationship. And yeah, in my own story, that was what was really happening too. It was just that I was so fixated on being like, whether a good poet or a good songwriter. Like, I just thought if I just did the right thing exceedingly well, then that was going to be the ticket to like becoming successful in some sort of way that I couldn't even describe. And it just brought me so much turmoil because
yeah.
you're riding this wave of like everything being completely dependent on a fantasy, but rather when I gave my life up and just was like, this no longer belongs to me. Like, I'm in service to this, you know. That's when things became like deeply seated and meaningful, and I began to start to participate with the cosmos and be able to like grow a little bit and to like have more solid relationships and have things come together, not being constantly fluctuating on highs and lows and chasing vain pursuits and all that stuff. So it seems like that sort of cycle that humans go through, you see it played out through all sorts of stories in the Old Testament. You see it played out in stories in the New Testament, and bringing it into like Gilgamesh cycle of the hero type stuff. I'm sure that it's pretty similar to all those people's experiences. The Lord of the Rings. You've got this comfortable little life in the Shire, but it's when it's threatened. That you actually get into like the call and the purpose or whatever. Um, yeah, one thing I've thought a lot. I've thought in my life that my poetry seems to be like very like really what I'm sort of working with in terms of material is just like my experience of the world or my spiritual experience or something. And I've kind of always thought it'd be it'd be nice if I could get a good story that I wanted to tell, and I haven't really got there yet. I would like to write a short novel, but I think what we're getting at in this conversation is that part of what story is really just an honest portrayal of a character in their spiritual depth and their full dimension as a vulnerable person or something like that. Does that sound warm to you?
It sounds pretty good. Uh, because I let me try and reference because this is a question I had from one of your earlier emails, and I think it's relevant to this. Um, where you tried, let me just pull up that email. I tried to have actual notes. I'm usually bad about that. So this
Oh,
was
no
you
worries.
describing on Poesophy. Poesophy.
Poesophy.
Poesophy. Okay. I'll probably never get that right. We're gonna try. Poesophy, where I'm developing an approach to life that is participative and co-creative, poetic in parentheses, with the cosmos. You said I'm inspired by Coleridge, John Vervaeke, and Owen Barfield. Uh, it is my suspicion that the wormholes of analytic philosophy can be avoided when one pays more attention to mere being and lets go of the addiction to making true propositions in favor of finding associations and connections and living virtuously. A slogan I created is "A life well lived is the ultimate poem." And the number one question I had on
Mhm.
your expression here is saying that let's go of the addiction to making true propositions in favor of finding associations and connections. And as I've been, I guess, kind of hinting at, I consider the spirit and the physical to both be as true as one another. So I'm curious
Mhm.
as to what your definition of true
Yeah.
is here, where true
Yeah.
propositions, where you say, like let go of the addiction of making true propositions. Because to me that sounds
Yeah.
almost opposite to how I am perceiving the idea of true.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it that I'm always trying to get at with that, where I get into the so it's like someone makes a fact uh claim of someone makes a claim about the nature of a thing, with the eh, eh, to which someone else disagrees with the characterization. It kind of gets in it can cause the illusion of um, disagreement, or
So
ah
it seems kind of hard to define. Is there an earlier
yeah, I mean,
step in the idea of true or proposition that we should start at that would
yeah,
hopefully help
and
you?
the way I formulated it was probably a little bit, well, it was off the cuff, and it was probably a little bit clumsy, I guess. Yeah, I'm not. I I can see it. I see it in life where two people just simply disagree with the nature of a truth claim about the nature of some specific thing, and then they disagree. And I don't know enough about like Hegel or anything to understand thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I don't understand any of that. I know that Coleridge had an idea of the definition of poetry being the reconciliation of discordant or oppositional qualities, where two things that would seem to be opposing one another have some sort of interaction with one another that leads to a deeper truth that's not directly able to be stated, because the nature of human language and human categorization seem to be insufficient for expressing whatever that larger thing is. And so I sort of think of truth as being like in the realm of the ideal, something towards which we aspire, but never fully attain. Though, and I think of the thing I don't like about the way I formulated in that statement was, I do think that we say true things, but I often think that the way we experience it is in a revelatory fashion that isn't able to be easily succinctly expressed in a way that is going to seem palatable to everyone. Some people are going to be put off by what is apparently true to one person, but then there is a deeper truth that's true to everyone. But we're going to disagree as individual humans about how we characterize that. So it transcends, right? It's why the good, the beautiful, and the true are the transcendentals. Um, And you get into similar kind of territory conceptually when talking about beauty. Is beauty objective? And then you get back and forth about that. But I think the beautiful is objective, but we're going to have human disparity in how we articulate that, trying to attend toward that transcendental. And so poetry in the sort of Coleridgean Barfieldian way of going about it is this energy that's created by this polarity as we aspire toward that end, right? That telos, if that made any sense at all.
So I think, because I've been trying to think of a way to have definitions for what I believe is the same thing you're trying to hit at. So maybe I'd be able to help you have
Yeah,
better
sure.
words for the same concept,
Please.
because I've been living, and I still hear people who I feel like should know better than to say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder or completely subjective, because you hear that all the
Mm-hmm.
time nowadays. And I'm like,
Absolutely, yeah.
if this was true, because I've come to the position where I'm like, I outright reject the idea or the notion that beauty is not objective and that ugliness is not objective, because you'll meet everyone and you'd be like, is this beautiful? And everyone will say this is beautiful, and like, is this terrible? And everybody will be like, that's terrible. You could think of, for like
Mm-hmm.
sounds, people like the sound of a guitar. It's like hardly anybody is going to dislike the sound of a guitar, if anyone does. But you're also, if you made somebody listen to nails on a chalkboard, everyone's going to say that's a terrible sound. So it's like, these are both things that anybody could say is beautiful, but one of them is actually beautiful and the other one is actually terrible to hear. But the thing about a guitar versus like a piano, which they both sound beautiful, is that some people are going to say the guitar is the most beautiful instrument because it encapsulates what sound should most sound like to be beautiful, and somebody else is going to say, well, the piano is the most beautiful instrument because it sounds the most like how beauty should sound. So the guitar and the piano are both beautiful. They're both pointing to an objective sense of beauty, but there is preference for which of those beauties you like more. So it's the sense that there is a greater truth and an actual objective standard for what beauty is, but your personal desire and or understanding of that beauty can vary to somebody else's. So you're both aiming at the same beauty, but
Mm-hmm.
one of you prefers this aspect of that beauty and whereas the other person prefers this aspect. And so you have like
Mm-hmm.
the guitar fans versus the piano fans, but both love beautiful music and sound. And that's the combining factor of those two, is that there is an objective beautiful sound that can be found in both a guitar and a piano, with somebody liking the guitar more and somebody liking the piano more. But both of those people would still also say nails on the chalkboard is bad. So it's like there's an objective anti sound just as much as there's an objective beauty sound.
Yeah, and I think just what I'm getting at with Poesophy is just more, um, you will just within philosophy, you'll have your deontologists and you'll have your virtue ethicists and you'll have your, I don't know, I don't know all of philosophy all that well, but you'll have your people who like take a set of assumptions to be true, and then they're broken off into their groups, and then they argue with their circles. But I think a more ancient sense of the love of wisdom, philosophia, I just feel like the aesthetic realm, of sensory perception and beauty, is just where mentally I feel like that's a good way to take the mind back to a way of considering ideas, um, in a pleasurable and I mean, not necessarily always needing to be pleasurable, but pleasure is one of the fruits of it. Mode of playing with ideas and enjoying concepts and drawing closer to a greater understanding of the depth of reality. Um, so I would never really make too strong of a claim about Poesophy being in any way like superior to any other approach or anything. But it's simply like sort of just kind of how I went about, um, landing with, how I choose to use language and how I, choose to think about thought and stuff. Because I am curious about philosophy. But I am more curious about philosophy insofar as it helps me to better apprehend the true nature of reality and appreciation of the divine, and ultimately, in my heart of hearts, and in my apostolate, because it is sort of an apostolate to some extent, in my praise of God.
So I actually want to go back a little bit to dejection, um, because like you've explained in the article that I read, is that Coleridge is still experiencing the things that he considers beautiful, but he is incapable of experiencing them at this moment as being beautiful. He's like, I'm just here experiencing, but there's
Mhm.
now no longer beauty in the experience.
Yeah, the
Um,
way he expresses it is I see, not feel how beautiful they are. I see them all, how excellently fair. I see, not feel, how beautiful they are.
yes, and I really like that expression and that idea, because I think you even put in the article that he's getting at like depression, which pulls
Mhm.
you away from the ability to experience beauty.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something that everybody at some point will struggle with: depression, or just not being able to experience beauty. You can find it in the
Mhm.
Psalms, you can find it in Proverbs, just all throughout the Bible.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and for yourself, you said you also got to that point where you were just like,
Mhm.
I'm so lost that I can't experience beauty in the things that I once experienced beautiful, including poetry. Where you're like, I'm reading the poetry, I'm experiencing the poetry, but all I'm doing is I'm reading and I'm experiencing. I don't have actual feelings for the poetry anymore, because I've
Mhm.
lost that sense of joy. So
Mm.
I guess for yourself, how did losing your joy bring you back around to realizing you had to, as you said, become joyful towards other people so that you could then re-experience joy yourself? Can you kind of explain what that is?
Mm. How how did I experience it, or how did I experience getting out of it?
Well, let's do that in that order. How did you get into the joyless state to where things were just happening, and then how did you find your way out of it?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I really got into the joyless state because I well, part of it is drinking is a part of my story, and I had trouble with compulsive drinking, and I destroyed a lot of relationships. I lost a job, and more than once I would have a long-term intimate relationship with a woman, and then that wouldn't work out. Um, and I hit a place where I just didn't feel like I was ever gonna have a meaningful job or relationship. It was just like I was just uh, I was just completely isolated. It just pushed everyone away. Now, fortunately, I hadn't completely pushed away my family. So part of my experience of shifting and getting out of it became, really appreciating my family, really appreciating my siblings and my parents, and then slowly that became a motivation for me to want to be a better person. And I was lucky because, like, before it really happened, like, I mean, there have been periods in my life where it had happened to lesser extents, and then it happened to a more intense extent about 3 years ago. And I was fortunate that, like, in my recovery from the lesser extents, I had picked things up along the way. Like, I had picked up, like, some interest in Stoicism, and I'd picked up some interest in Buddhism. And so, like, I had these things, and like I said, I was a cradle Catholic, so I had that in the background. Um, and so I had some of that in my mental vocabulary to draw on, but it really took me. It In one part of it, it was me realizing that it was selfish to be so judgmental about other people. That was part of it. But it also involved me realizing that the the how to put this, it wasn't just about whether or not I was a good person in the eyes of others. It it was more about realizing how the relationship between myself and others was evocative of a deeper relationship between all beings with one another in the world. Like, so, like, let's say I just decided, oh, like, I'm just an unlovable person and nobody's ever gonna love me because I'm bad. Like, let's say that I just decided that's the case. Okay, well, I could accept that, but what was important wasn't whether or not I was a good or bad person. What was important was that I was seeing how the way that I was interacting with things was influencing the experience of others. And what I was concerned with was not how I was seen, but was rather that they were suffering, and I didn't want them to suffer. I wanted to help them. When I start to see that, then that starts to create a different axis. It's and different energy starts to become generated, and then it starts to be like, well, rather than it be like, well, it doesn't really matter if I get drunk today because I'm just alone anyway, and who does it affect? Well, now being drunk is actually really good because, I'm showing up for life, and then that's like a better situation to be in relation to in the world and others. And then and then that energy starts to build a little bit more and more, and then it starts to become, to think about others more often, and then to do small things for others, to call someone once in a while, and then it starts to grow and expand. So, and then suddenly, at some point, then you realize, oh, like now I'm actually a natural organism again, and I'm naturally giving and receiving, inhaling and exhaling, an organism should. And as spiritual beings, I think that's part of what. Never thought of that metaphor before, but that makes sense. Inhalation, exhalation. Uh, yeah, because if you're not giving and receiving with people, and you're not um, taking in and creating the way you need to as a spiritual being, and we're spiritual beings, so.
Well, it's not only that we're spiritual, but we are intentionally designed by God to kind of want to have familial relationships with each other, even if we aren't an immediate family. Because the heaven, right? It's the wedding feast, but everyone at the wedding feast is the bride. So it's like to the extent that at least in heaven, where everything is going to be as it was intended to be, the amount of community we have with everyone else there is to the same level that we would have had community with just ourselves. So with the lack of joy, it sounds like whenever you focus just on yourself, you lose touch with everyone else. And so you lose the ability to experience joy, because joy is knowing other people and helping other
Mm.
people, because that's satisfying. And as you're saying, like breathing in and breathing out, being like breathing in is almost like the lack of joy, and the breathing out is the giving of joy. And maybe the sense is that what we're trying to get at the end is kind of a state where we are at all times breathing in and out at the exact same time. So it's like
Oh,
the
interesting.
the experience of helping other people, but at the same time other people helping us in equal measure,
Mm.
is kind of like your body taking care of itself. So all members and all aspects of what the body is doing at the exact same time, even though every aspect is different, it is the same thing at the same time. Kind of like God in three persons, but taken
Mm.
to human connection level. So, as it stands right now, it's like you have yourself, then your family, then your cousins, your friends, strangers, enemies. That's kind of the idea that we have now, and it's kind of like that's what we have to have at this current moment. But later on, it is to the point where there are no enemies, there are no strangers. The cousins are now brothers and sisters. The brothers and sisters are now uh, bride and bride and groom turns into you and God, because he's the ultimate groom. So it just like folds back in on
Mm.
itself, and that's where you find actual full proper relationship. And
Mm.
that's maybe why, like in heaven, you're not going to be sad. It's not necessarily just because you're in the presence of God and who all good things are, but that
Mm.
it's you and your relationships to everybody else has become folded back in to such a tight knit mode that you're essentially the singular body, which is already implied by like Paul in some of his letters, where he's like, "You're all part of the exact same body. Why are you arguing? Why are you falling
Mm.
apart from one another?" And even for recovery, um, they you mentioned AA in this article, and maybe even during this conversation. And it's like whenever you are in Coleridge in his poem, also he's like, I had to start helping others in essence, even if it was just mentally helping people, not even physically
Mm.
helping people. I had to
Mm.
reframe recovery and joy, in the sense of joy isn't me, it's me helping others. And
Mhm.
once I want good for others and I help others, I will then feel good, and others will not even necessarily need to have input towards me, but I will then have the sense that I need to recover myself, because I'll start, I don't know, maybe seeing myself in the same way that I see other people, because it's easier to be
Mhm.
nicer to other people whenever you're depressed than to ever be nice to yourself, which is why you allow yourself to continually spiral downwards a lot of times, and
Mhm.
why it's hard to let people in whenever you are spiraling, even if you still want to help people during that time.
Mhm.
I went all over that place. Pick
Yeah,
up wherever you
and
want.
Christ was, Jesus was always like saying provocative things to try to like spur that in people, to love your enemies, or like, bringing up the Samaritan, or then he was saying things like, uh, uh, kind of give up on your parents to follow me. Like, uh, if you're loving your parents more than you live, he's not, I don't think he's really, really saying like, to love someone abusive or to not love your family, but he's just playing with those relationships the way that we feel in the comfort zone of what relationships are, to get take us out of our assumptions and our little like safety area, to be like to break open that reciprocity we're talking about. And something, back to the It's a Wonderful Life story, I mean, it's like part of um you mentioned that, prayer and the generation of spirit and the angel appearing to George Bailey and all that stuff. But another aspect of that film and that story is, he he thought he was useless, but it turns out that actually he people that part of the reason that he thought he was useless was because he was not able to see just how valuable he was. And
Mm-hmm.
when he was able to, like, I can't remember exactly what happened in the film that enabled him to
In
make
which
the
at which
shift.
to make the shift of being able to see. So the angel
Yeah.
uh, allows him to see what the effects of everyone's life would be if he was not there. And so he
Mhm.
starts off with
Mhm.
the current moment, which is like,
Right.
well, my car's on the tree and the
Yeah.
car's not there. He's like, okay, well, then he goes to the town and he's like, well, the
Right.
town looks different. It's not all the
Town
people
looks
aren't
different.
nice
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
here. Mary is an old maid, which is what she said she never wanted to become. And then it goes all the
Hmm.
way to the beginning of the film where he sees his brother Harry died, and because his brother Harry died and didn't become a war hero who shot down a kamikaze plane, everyone in the carrier died. So it's just like your little actions that you don't realize are good because you're referencing yourself the entire time
Hmm.
actually affected everyone in such a positive way that everyone loves you, and you can't hear the prayers that everyone's praying for you right now. But now that you have the frame of reference of like, oh, I have done good, so he has an internal sense now of what I have been doing is right all along. He goes back to the bridge, realizes he's in the real world, and then you go back to the house where everyone there loves him, and then the entirety of the town, who he previously couldn't see himself the way they saw him, but now he sees himself in a better light, and then everyone comes in and reveals how they feel about him in the way that he couldn't have originally appreciated, because everyone in the entire film is always
Hmm.
showing him appreciation. He gives them houses,
Hmm.
um, he builds a neighborhood and makes them the houses cheap so that everyone can afford it. He lends money
Hmm.
whenever everybody doesn't have money, and they trust that they'll pay it off when there's no proof that they can do it, no collateral.
Hmm.
So it kind of, he's, for his story in particular, he first sees his he sees himself in a different light, kind of like sees the mirror of the reality that he's living in. So it allows the mirror allows him to see who he actually is and where he's actually living. And then later
Mm.
everyone else expresses to him how they see him, and so it finalizes the sense of like I'm now in the correct place and I now have see my purpose properly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a hard thing if you're in the broken space where you're dejected, it's hard to see how other people see you. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to see how you fear that they might see you
Mm-hmm.
and to respond to that fear. But instead of like doing the stoic premeditatio malorum, the sort of running through the exercise of imagining the worst case scenario, you're mistaking the worst case scenario for the reality. When in reality, if you're honest and open and vulnerable and giving, that's a huge part of it. Giving,
Mm-hmm.
people are forgiving, right? So
Yeah.
even if they say, yeah, I didn't love that you did that, but I also see it in the context of this larger narrative, and I don't think of you as essentially bad or whatever, you know? Like and when you can see that, then it's like then you can sort of feel more love for yourself, you know? If you can't see that, then it's like it's like you and that's like sort of the pride and vanity are such malicious sins in that way. Like
Mm-hmm.
pride and vanity, it just creates such a distortion of who you are that you can actually idealize yourself to like godlike proportions while also despising yourself. It's like that type of person that it would take to actually be that ideal that or not ideal, idealized, um, idealization. That's the word I'm looking for. The idealization is actually reprehensible to some ethical sense within your psyche. So so it's like I feel like haughty and lofty and aggrandized, but at the same time, I secretly hate myself because that's why would I ever want to be that? And that's like how complex we can be as human beings. It can really get that murky, and that's why virtue I find virtue to just to be absolutely essential to like participating in the world and to uh, not just being good in some ideal sense, but just to actually to just have good relationships, giving relationships that are uh, enjoyable. you know.
What? Because we were talking about self love, and I was thinking, because nowadays you hear about self love all the time, and everybody's like, "Well, now I'm
Hmm.
depressed," but at the same time, you have to have self love, otherwise you get to the depression that Coleridge is talking about and that you were previously talking about.
Yeah.
So you think they're like two different self loves. There's the self love of like vanity, which you're like, I'm the greatest thing ever, and you're so focused on yourself that you take that internal deep dive into depression by thinking so highly of yourself. But then there's the other self love, which is, we'll use the humble self love because that's what you said, to where it's like, I love myself because I am actively partaking in good deeds that allow me to like see in my own life if I'm paying attention to how I'm acting. It's like I don't need to have a high sense of myself. I just am. So it's like in it, the proper embodiment of self love is to I'm gonna steal a term from Malcolm Guite, to body forth
Mm-hmm.
that internal love, whereas the
Mm-hmm.
other love doesn't body forth. It puts that love even further inside of you, and it kind of gets lost in the eternal darkness of the soul in that sense. And that's why you like spiral downwards. Do you think I'm getting at something there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the virtue that's in it's the responsive or antidote virtue for the sin of pride is humility,
Mm.
and Catholicism is really nice because it has this constant asking for forgiveness all the time, which a lot of people find that off-putting. It's like, geez,
That's
Catholicism
great.
is like so obsessed with being guilty. You're always guilty, asking for forgiveness. Well, yeah, it's wonderful because you ask for forgiveness and you're forgiven.
Yeah.
And you're constantly asking for it because you're constantly wanting to just perfect a little bit more, not for the sake of being again this vainglorious, um, nasty ego creature, but rather to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And you ask for forgiveness to like just always improve that little increment more that just opens you up more and more to like the divine influx of like pure love, that Christ offers, and yeah.
So I
I guess
want
that's
to
all I was
take
gonna say.
that idea. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, but take that idea of
No.
you're saying like everybody's like, why are you so obsessed with like all the bad things you did? But the kind of like the way you're describing it, it's like, well, maybe it's not. I'm focused on the bad things I've done, but it's like I want to keep in my mind always that I want to do the right thing, and by saying I'm sorry for any bad thing I may have done, even if I didn't know it, it's reminding me that I want to be a good person and that I'm aiming for
Hmm.
that. So it's not
Hmm.
you're referencing at all times forgiveness of the bad things you've done, but it's not
Hmm.
to keep yourself down. It's rather to inspire you upwards to continue doing better.
It's like the pedaling the bicycle that causes the propulsion to be in motion going forward always, and to be balanced so that you're not falling this way or
Mm-hmm.
that. And it's it um if you get to the point where I was, where you're just like uh pardon my expression, but like you're like all the way down, you start at that place, and it's just like, well, if just today I could not do that thing again, just for today, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'm never going to be forgiven, but if I can just at least pray in the first place, and then you start to ask this. Well, then you get into a pattern, and it snowballs and it develops until you're actually like an upright bipedal human being walking on 2 feet, and then it just becomes like the practice of asking forgiveness is just like it's just a participation in the experience of life where you accept, because it goes alongside other things within the mystical body of Christ, who is our Holy Mother, the Church. You also like, at the beginning of Mass, I confess mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, for my most grievous sins of it. I ask Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me, the Lord our God. Well, if I'm asking my brothers and sisters to pray for me, by extension, I must pray for them
Yeah.
because they are also sinners. Right? It only follows logically. So if I'm asking them to pray for me, then they're asking me to pray for them. And so, haha, now we're both accepting that we're all in this together. We're all going through the same thing. We're all constantly worried that what we did has made us somehow insufficient for the love of God, which is just incomprehensible that we could ever be worthy of it. And yet, we are nothing but worthy, so much so that He was incarnate and went through not only any suffering we could go through, but even more horrifying suffering. And it was like, oh, and then you build into this mystical body, and then it's like open, it's reciprocal opening all the way up,
Hmm.
you know. Yep.
Yeah, I like that way of putting it. And I am paying attention to the time, so it's getting close. So I want to hit on uh, a couple of questions I actually wrote down. But my intention
Yeah,
was just to have us move forward with our thoughts the whole time. So we have accomplished
sure.
exactly what I was aiming for.
Beautiful.
Um, so the first thing I wanted to do, since I asked you for some poetry references, wanted to tell you what I thought about each of them. So Dejection was
Oh,
the very
cool.
first one I read, and I feel like we've talked about that a lot. For me, poetry um, and classical music are like the two art forms I have yet to properly figure out how to enjoy them or why people
Mm.
enjoy them so much. And I'm able to enjoy a lot of things that a lot of people aren't. And I can kind of most of the time see why people can do these things or can get to the point where they like these things and think they're phenomenal. So this is talking to you. It's kind of like, oh, this is my first step into them. So like Dejection, I could tell that there's so much more than what I was able to pull out of it. And I'm
Mm.
hoping that this poem treats me the way that Crime and Punishment does, where I read Crime and Punishment once, but I find myself, even to this day, even though I read it probably 18 years ago, still remembering other aspects about that book and just being like, wow, that was a phenomenal thing to realize. Uh, and I think I'll come back to this poem as well and get significantly more out of it, much closer to what you've
I
gotten out
hope
of it.
so. I hope so.
And then you also said T.S. Eliot's Four
And Crimeman
Quartets,
is on my list, by the way.
Crime and Punishment.
Anyway,
It
yep.
is dense and it is hard to read. Whenever I finished reading it, I was like, I'm probably going to remember none of this. And then I
Mm.
found myself again after these 18 years, having only read it once, suddenly realizing something in the story that I didn't realize before, and I was like,
Well, that's so cool.
this is incredible writing. If I've only read
Yeah.
it once, and more things keep coming out of it. And
Yeah.
he sent T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, and I
Hmm.
have to say, I think it was the third quartet. It was the second or the third quartet. I think it was the second one was the first one that actually kind of made sense with me a little bit because of some thoughts I've already had. Like, in my beginning is my end, in succession, houses
Mm.
rise and fall, crumble and extended, or move, destroyed, restored, or in their place. Uh, and the it's kind of for the second one, it's kind of getting at an idea of like I can't even think of the right way of putting it. The ending is the beginning, which is I think the idea of like being born again in Christianity. It's like I've
Mm.
gotten to the point where I'm at my end, and now I accept the new beginning. So where ashes were, now this thing is, and it's new and better thing, and that's where I
Mhm.
am now. And then dry salvages. I liked the idea. The four quartets seem to hit on a different aspect of what T.S. Eliot considers the full life, I suppose, like the different aspects of life that we experience. And
Ah,
three
sure.
is gods. He's like, I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. And so the rest of it is him, I think, trying to conceptualize the best he can what the definition of God is, because I don't actually know what
Uh-huh.
his faith stance was on anything, but it seems that in reference to things that he can put into words and that he can see and know that other people have a reference for, a sea is beyond the capacity for anybody to understand, but it's accessible to everybody. And so that's, I think, maybe why he thought about referring to the sea as a god for that part of the poem. And then the one that I appreciated you sending most was John Keats' Ode on Melancholy, because
Ah, yeah.
I found it the easiest to get in line with because I was reading it and I was just like, oh, he's just sitting there with the girl he loves, and I felt that one a lot better. I was like, I feel this one.
Sure.
It's like this is she dwells with beauty, beauty that must die, and joy whose hand is ever at her lips. So he's like loving the fact that he's with her, but also pre-recognizing that all things pass away, but he enjoys
Hmm.
the moment with the beautiful thing. And I
Hmm.
like that a lot. So going on to the fact that I am trying to get into poetry, and you're also wanting to get more people into poetry and to Poesophy. Is that, did I get it right that
Hmm.
time?
Yeah.
All right, woo, I'm improving. Who are, or do you have, because for me I like getting compendiums or collections. Are there
Hmm.
any collections of poetry that you're like, start here?
Mm. Collections.
If you can't think
I'm
of a
gonna.
collection, then just the
I
first
I want
poems that come to your mind, I guess.
while I'm thinking I'm gonna put that on the back burner of my consciousness and see if my
Mm-hmm.
brain comes up with something. Um, as I answer the question another way, I have two films to recommend to you. You're a
Okay.
cinema man. Jane Campion directed a film called Bright Star
All right, Jane
about John
Campion,
Keats. Yep.
Bright Star.
Yeah, it stars Ben Whishaw and I forget who plays Fanny Braun, but it's a very beautiful picture. The photography is stunning. Acting is superb. Music is wonderful. The lighting, all of the texture, and it's a nice little sort of biographical setting for the Keats poems and that relationship with her. Keats had a brother that he lost to tuberculosis, and then Keats himself contracted it and died young. And
Mm.
so part of the reason that Keats was like aware of the impermanence, was because of this struggle watching his brother die. And the film really just brings out the passion of the relationship. And Campion does something in that film where she uh, attributes some words to Keats in the dialogue that he never actually wrote, but he talks about how poetry should soothe and embolden the mind to accept mystery. Um, and I just think that's a delicious concept. And actually, if anybody wants to look at Poesophy, I have an article a little bit about that movie. Another film you might check out, which you may have seen before, that's actually kind of related to It's a Wonderful Life and some of the concepts we were talking about, is Groundhog Day with Bill Murray.
I have
Have
seen
you ever seen
Groundhog
that?
Day. Yeah, I saw it in theater. It
Groundhog
was re-released.
Yin with an eye and an ear open for poetry, and that film actually has some poetry baked into it that if you're watchful and really attentively listen, it'll give you some some little literary
Would you say its
sample.
poetry is in the dialogue, or rather because it's a repetitious film and
It's
lots of
actually
poems have A B stanzas and
uh,
stuff?
well, the latter as well, but the former, yeah, it's actually written right into the dialogue. You'll get some poetry referred to you. Well, you've already for a beginner, um, just like a um,
Who are, let me rephrase the question. Who are the
yeah.
easiest poets to get into? Because that
Oh,
is
that's a
something
good
I could
question.
find on my own.
There's always Robert Frost. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
Robert Frost gets recommended enough. He's a very plain spoken farmer poet.
Mm-hmm.
Another another farmer poet that I am partial to because I live in Iowa is James Hurst. He's actually from Cedar Falls, next door to where I live. James Hurst wrote in the mostly in like the 30s through the 50s.
All right.
But I'm a big Wallace Stevens man as well. But
Wallace
Stevens is more
Stevens.
heady. He's more heady and abstract, but he's very beautiful. Those are a few that you might start with. Emily Dickinson, well, she's difficult too, but she's also really easy to connect to
Hey, that's
because she
okay.
writes
It's
in the
it's
hymn
different layers.
form.
I'll just read whatever you
Mhm.
suggest and see what I
But
click
you
with.
know what? you're in touch with Adam Walker, so he'll give you some recommendations too.
I need to watch more of his videos because I haven't quite figured out everything that he's talking about yet, but it's just because I've only seen like 4 of his videos so far. So once I go back and
Sure.
actually watch it, I think I'll resonate a lot more with it.
Right on.
And then just to make sure I hit it while we still have time, do you have any upcoming projects that you want people to know about?
I really don't. Just keep your eye on Poesophy at YouTube. That's spelled Poesophy.
All
And
right.
then again, aaronmcnally.substack.com, where I had been in a publishing thing where I was trying to write once or twice a week, but then I got a lot of overtime at my day job and everything just got washed to the side. So, but yeah, my YouTube channel, I'm reading poetry on there. I've got several videos and I'm trying to build it up. But yep, just subscribe to the Substack. And if you're on my YouTube channel, I'd love if you would subscribe to that because it would definitely help the
I will. I
algo.
will subscribe to all of it.
Beautiful.
And I'll, reason I'm getting you to references. Hopefully, anybody who's interested in you will go ahead and click on all of it too. And trying to figure out. Oh, you mentioned in your article that I read daily practices as being
Mhm.
an antidote or a cure. What are daily practices that you recommend to people?
The first thing I do every morning is I stand up, give the sign of the cross, and pray the Our Father. And I actually have a pretty strict prayer regimen of several prayers that I say. I say them throughout the day, so I would definitely recommend. I would recommend prayer to anybody. Um, Also, I'm a big fan of seated meditation, just good old fashioned mindfulness meditation, sitting and
Mm-hmm.
closing your eyes and just letting go of thoughts and deepening. Um, I'm a big fan of walking too. I think walking is super underrated. Well, at least it is where I live. Where I live, it seems like everybody's like, well, if you have a car, well, obviously you should take a car everywhere. But I would much rather walk if it's only a mile or three because I really think that somebody said walking is the rhythm of the soul or something like that, and that sounds about right.
It forces your brain to access certain parts of itself. Uh, I get it.
I
It's kind
think
of like
so
the same
too.
with shower thoughts. Um,
Yeah.
then another one was, who are other people that you think I should interview? So people that maybe you want to hear what they have to say, or people that you think would be open to it.
Oh. Um. Well, that's a good question. You might consider talking to Jake Favor.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, his last name is spelled Favor. He does a practice called circling, which is a sort of dialogical practice of very mindful and attentive listening. And it's oriented towards really seeing the person where they are non-judgmentally and opening to invite communication that allows them to feel seen and heard in an authentic way. And it's really, really something. I think you guys might have a nice conversation.
Awesome. Can you give me 2 more off the top of your head?
Two more off the top of my head that are like sort of in my realm,
Yeah.
like somebody who uh, is teaching and reading, writing poetry that's also in the verse community named Shivani Howe, Sivani, Howe, Howe. I don't know much about their work, but I think they might be in the same kind of ballpark of the sort of spiritual, artistic stuff. but a little bit more outside of Christianity, which might be interesting for you.
Hmm.
Another person you might want to talk to is Michael DeClerc, DeKlerk. He's also on Versed. I don't know that he's given many public interviews, and I don't know that he has many like public projects per se, though he does publish his own poetry on Substack. But I think he would be somebody that would definitely be receptive to conversing with you.
Awesome. Would you be able to later on today send me an email with their names and like the best way of contacting
Yeah,
them that you're aware of? Okay, because that's the
sure,
contacting them is
absolutely.
going to be the hardest part. Um,
Yeah.
and then the last two questions, which I intended to be the first two questions, because I find them to be the greatest of all questions that can be asked. All right, what is your favorite
Okay.
color?
People have asked me this, and it's hard for me because it can differ. But this burgundy that I'm wearing right now, which from the color on my screen looks similar to the color
Probably.
of your blazer, but this is a very good color for me. That it's one I'm drawn to, but also like a deep kind of hunter forest green,
Hmm.
like
So maybe
such
like
as you
jewel
might see
tones
on evergreen
overall.
trees. What's that?
Like jewel tones, maybe.
Jewel tones. I'm not. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I like fashion, so they're like earth tones, pastels, jewel tones, things like
Yeah.
that. So
Okay. Yeah.
I think you might like jewel tones because this is not quite a jewel tone. It's more of a neutral, but
Mhm.
if yours is a little bit of a shinier burgundy, that's leaning more towards like a jewel tone. And then the description of the green you're giving, while the green, since it's in the real world, would be considered an earthy green,
Mhm.
the jeweled version of it might be so jewel tone or earthy colors maybe is the best way of putting it.
Sure.
And then the single
That
most
sounds great.
important question: um, do your shoes make you run faster?
My shoes make me run faster? Well, it depends on which pair of shoes I'm
Which pair
wearing.
of
I do
shoes?
have a pair of Brooks. I do have a pair of Brooks running shoes, which certainly make me run faster.
Excellent. Those are the questions that children ask, so I figured they're the most important. Good openers. All right. I
Yeah.
think that's all the time that you got. So thank you very much
Yeah.
for being
Yeah,
willing to
you're
do
very
this. I'll
welcome.
try and
I
get all this compiled and have all the notes in the video below, and I'll send it to you. And you can share it with anybody who might want
sure.
to learn a little bit more about
Absolutely.
you.
I will certainly share it on my Substack and elsewhere. And Kayla, it was wonderful to talk to you. It was my
It was
pleasure.
wonderful to
And I'll
talk to
send you
you as
that.
well.
Great. Glad to hear. I'll send you that email.
All right. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, you're welcome. You too.